For me, truth to power means that with music, there's a way of getting your point across in a nonviolent way. With Shostakovich, he was trying really hard to convey a message, but at the same time remain in the good graces of the government because he feared for his life.
Music is about truth, not just beauty. It's about ugliness as well. It's about expressing all the aspects of the human experience. Music can speak truth to power, can have an extra musical dimension in society. And I think a good way of thinking about the symphony is to think of it as the film score for a giant panoramic view of what happened at certain points in 1905. Beyond that, I think it's very important to understand that Shostakovich, writing in '57, asked basically to write something for the 40th anniversary of 1917, chose 1905. And that was a gesture that allowed him to avoid a symphony about 1917, which would by necessity, in order to please the authorities, have to end in triumph. So he was able to deal with the same tyranny, the Tsar, and the overthrow of the Tsar, or the attempt to redress grievances for those against the Tsar. He was able to deal with that subject and not have a triumphalist ending. And therefore he was able to give what I believe was the double message, the message to the party that these revolutionaries were heroes and this is a heroic piece, which it is, but the secondary message of when you try to rise up against tyranny and you can be crushed, this is the result.
It's just almost this incredible, unimaginable unleashing of sound, and it's just wild. I can't describe any better than that. Just wild to be sort of at the helm of it. I sort of feel like I'm at the helm of a ship almost. That's pitching in waves of sound, so to speak. And with Maestro Wolff up there, it just feels like he's sort of this sorcerer that is able to stir up this great upwelling of storytelling.
The four movements kind of take you through the year 1905. So in January, in Palace Square, in the cold, in St. Petersburg, the Tsar's Winter Palace, the square in front of the Winter Palace, thousands of workers came to petition the Tsar for redress of grievance, for bad working conditions, for just life was terrible, and as was their right, even in Tsarist times, to petition the Tsar was something people could do. And so they came peacefully, by and large, and that's the scene of the first movement, this kind of icy setting, timeless, very slow pulse, something ominous in the background, but the whole first movement is just a panoramic view of this square that morning as people are starting to gather.
The whole first movement is really still and makes use of that. Many people playing soft, and there's something very intense about it. It's a different kind of feeling than you would have if it was just one person. And I think it's so evocative and sort of can really set the scene in a more cinematic way.
And the flutes are singing a song about how difficult life is, how black the night is, and how much fear there is.
Well, I'm working really hard on trying to get the two different characters in Shostakovich. Usually in his writing, he's really amazing at writing really expressive pianissimo passages. Or I shouldn't say expressive, they're almost spookily translucent, if you will. So really sparse textures in the pianissimo passages.
Well, right now I'm just trying to make sure I play as beautifully as possible, since it really is just me. But I think it's really great how in all of the solos, he's really using the bassoon as to carry on that melody that was in all the other movements. So it's nice to be like a recurring theme, and then just like use just like a single bassoon for that theme. That's kind of fun.
This gives way without break to the biggest movement, the second movement, almost 20 minutes long, a kind of epic movement in which the petitioners, and immediately you hear the petitioner song, this motif is another folk song. Each movement has a song that every Soviet citizen would have recognized, even in the 50s. These were songs that were sung, that were taught to school children, that were the songs of the 1905 revolutionaries. And this is a song simply pleading to the Tsar that we are badly treated by your henchmen, please listen to us. And of course, this rises into enormous waves of intensity, subsides for a moment, and then, as was the case that day, kind of without provocation, the Tsar sent in the troops.
Well, yeah, with every single note in the symphony, I really strive for creating a specific sound or a certain feel or mood, definitely. Especially when gunshots should be firing off. I don't want to be playing very lightly, you know, really aggressive and really in your face.
So the setting changes. At that point, you're in the square, the violence has subsided, and you're left with the casualties lying on the ground. The third movement is entitled In Memoriam, and it's basically a funeral dirge. The violas play a famous song called You Fellas, Heroes, You Were Heroes, for those that were killed. Then another rather violent interruption, changes the mood completely, and we launch into the fourth movement, which is in some ways the most complex movement, because in this movement, the patriotic songs begin to get the upper hand. And a little history helps, because at this point, we should know that the public reaction against the suppression in January in Palace Square was so great that the Tsar found himself on the defensive. And there was a lot of political toing and froing, and by the middle of 1905, the Tsar had conceded many of the demands of the workers, and a parliament was supposed to be convened, and there were supposed to be independent councils, and the glimmerings of a free society, or of a society where the workers' rights were taken into consideration, was starting to emerge. And over the next 6 months, it was 2 steps forward, a step back, and you feel that in the struggle of the fourth movement. The songs emerge, and then there's some violence, and then the song emerges again, and there's this kind of epic struggle.
There's this constant level of stress throughout the entire piece that shows this just relentless force over the public, and within random spots of the symphony, you'll hear little spots where you can hear like the public kind of uprising a little bit and little glimmers of hope.
And what happened is toward the end of 1905, I think in December, the Tsar finally, fearing, I think, that he had unleashed too much freedom, initiated another brutal crackdown. And that was the final crackdown, and many of the workers' leaders were arrested, deported, imprisoned, executed, and the whole thing was over until 12 years later. You hear this kind of rising tide, and then once again, the strings again are playing very softly like the beginning. And then a long single English horn solo kind of laments looking back on the whole year is the way I feel that is. It gives you a hint of the songs, but everything is mournful. Another interruption of kind of aggressive music, and this crazed bass clarinet starts to play music from the second movement.
So I kind of see the fourth movement as they're losing. So I'm kind of like a bad guy in the bass clarinet. It's like the impending doom. I think the bass drum is behind me, and like it's an ominous texture, and then I come in. I don't sneak in at all. It's just out there. So I like lead the defeat of the revolution.
The symphony drives to a kind of relentless conclusion that can be very ambiguous, and this is a beautiful stroke of Shostakovich. In this conclusion, the sound of a bell emerges, and the title of the last movement is The Alarm Bell. And so this bell it has kind of cosmic proportions, I think, psychologically, at the end of the symphony, because it's like a warning, and Shostakovich himself was quoted much later as saying the bell was a reminder that there's something larger than man, there's something bigger than us, and that no matter how big the tyrant, essentially, there's something in the human spirit that can't be stopped.
With the music, there's certainly a way of expressing discontent or expressing a wish for change without using machine guns or other violent measures. So as an orchestra, it's amazing because we get to convey the hopes and fears of Shostakovich. Even so many years later, you can really still feel his spirit in the music.